Good morning, everybody. This is the academic vocabulary session of our SEED conference. We're going to be presenting over sixth grade content, specifically the ELA curriculum Wit and Wisdom. And we'll introduce ourselves in just a second. Okay, so my name is Bailey Stefik. This past year I taught sixth grade ELA at Grantham Academy, and I taught primarily beginning and intermediate ESL students.
And I'm Nathaniel Peak. I also taught sixth grade ELA, but at Hoffman Middle School, and I, as well as Ms. Stefik, primarily all of my blocks were beginner intermediate students.
And we're going to talk about some norms and expectations for our time together today. Thank you so much for those of you who have your cameras on already. It helps us just see a friendly face while we're presenting. So cameras on if you are able to, and then to contribute to the conversation, we're going to have a discussion today. And since it's a pretty small group, we'll probably just kind of discuss in whole group most of the time. And I also would encourage you all to be in an environment that's conducive to contribution. So just be somewhere where you can focus and kind of contribute to our session that we're going to show you today. So we're excited to have you.
Yes, and I just want to say real quick, congratulations for waking up early. I'm pretty sure this is difficult. For me, it's difficult because it's summer. And so anyway, I appreciate that. So thank you for your sacrifice.
Thank y'all for being here. We appreciate having somebody to present to talk to on this early morning. So our objective for today is teachers will know how to identify the 3 tiers of vocabulary. Teachers will understand how to embed academic vocabulary strategies in the Wit and Wisdom curriculum. Teachers will be able to discuss which vocabulary strategies they will implement to meet the needs of their ESL students. So we're going to look at some strategies that support ESL students, but honestly can support any learners. I know that some of y'all, I saw that you were ELA regular, but the strategies we show you today can be used to kind of support any student group, but they're especially helpful for ESL students.
Okay, and what we're going to get started with today is vocabulary tiers. I'm sure some of you are aware of the 3 tiers of English vocabulary, but just in case, I'm going to kind of review that. And it's important that our students are aware that there are categories of that English words fall into. So why do students need to be aware of the tiers of vocabulary? Well, they need to be able to categorize or group words to help them know the word's purpose and their typical place for usage, where they can typically be heard or found. Also, students need to understand that certain words have multiple meanings, and therefore they will be used when talking about a variety of topics or contents. And also to have a basic understanding of the frequency that they will encounter certain words in English as they master those new words. So just a quick review of the vocabulary tiers if you're not familiar. And I will put an anchor chart in my room, I did last year, I just familiarize them with the tiers so that they're aware of what level of word they're working on. So the tier 1 words are most of the words in the English language. So if you read a text, most of the words are tier 1 words, and they're mostly sight words and root words. Tier 2 words are high frequency words, and they're often multiple meaning words and academic words. So if you're star-minded like most of us, most of the frames and the stems of star questions, when students are being asked to do something, the verb is usually a tier 2 word. So here's some examples like cite, develop, an example, context, examine, convey, express. Those are tier 2 words. And often these words kind of get the back seat when we're in the classroom because we usually focus on the tier 3 words because those are the words that we find in our TEKS. Frequency, and they're very they're content specific. And background knowledge is critical to access these words. Okay, so that's why we spend a lesson or two on specific vocabulary, because we need to build this background for them. So the tier 3 words in ELA might be myth or thesis or fluency or figurative language, photosynthesis in science, percent, fraction, numerator would be in math. So just helping students be aware that numerator, they might find in math class. They probably won't find it necessarily in science in middle school or in history, but they may read about it in ELA in a nonfiction text. So just being aware of the vocabulary words for specific content areas. And in my classroom, this last year, I had these 3 little charts here to just kind of be a graphic representation of what these tiers might look like. So the tier 1 word for this picture is a dog. The tier 2 word, which is an academic word, which you might find in a novel, is canine. And for our EL learners, that might be difficult because those 2 words look very different. And then this tier 3, the content specific word, would be Canis lupus familiaris, which is the Latin scientific term for a dog. Okay, so vocabulary is a learning process, and organizing what kinds of words we need to know are important so our brain can hold on to them long term. Showing students this graphic will help them understand the categories that they will encounter in an academic environment and beyond as they become professionals. So ideally, we want our ELs to, acquire English, but we also want them to have academic conversations. So being aware that, students, I would like to hear one tier 2 word that we have on our word wall in your conversation today. So just getting them acclimated. Wherever our students go, whether it's college or a career, they're still going to be using tier 3 words, and they're going to be using tier 2 words. So if they're a mechanic, an alternator is a word that you would use in that job. So this is very important for life, for them to just be aware. If you've ever used vocabulary.com or any kind of vocabulary game, digital online game, vocabulary.com does not work with tier 1. They only work with tier 2 and tier 3. So if you have beginners, you might need to have a word wall that is sight words that are the tier 1 words, just to get them kind of caught up to where they need to be to fill in that gap. In Wit and Wisdom, they have set up a set of vocabulary tiers, and it kind of aligns with tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, but they focus on tier 2 and tier 3. So they're assuming that all of our students are fully aware of what tier 1 words are, they're comfortable with them. And this is how Wit and Wisdom divides their vocabulary. They have a content vocabulary list, an academic vocabulary list, and a text critical vocabulary list. Okay, and Wit and Wisdom has already created these lists for us. They show us the vocabulary that will be covered in the lessons of the module, and they have lists of words that will be in the class text that are critical to comprehending our text that we read. This vocabulary information is found in the teacher's edition of the curriculum in Appendix B. So if you're in the digital, I think most of us are ELA. So if you're in the digital version of our curriculum, when you log in through Clever, on the left-hand side are all the lesson overviews and all the lessons. At the very bottom, it says appendices. When you open that up, kind of check that out, because that is like a lifeline and a resource that you will really love, because all of your word wall words and the vocabulary that's coming up that you want to maybe front load for your EL students, it's already there for you. And it tells you how it's going to be introduced. So if there's an outside in strategy, it kind of tells you what strategies are in the curriculum.
And I'm going to show you a vocabulary strategy that I use in my classroom every day. It's one that's associated with our daily objective, or our CUB, that integrates the academic vocabulary that exists in Wit and Wisdom. So first of all, how do we identify the academic vocabulary? As instructors of ESL students, we need to be aware that comprehending and using academic vocabulary is one of the last steps in the language acquisition process. And as such, it can be very challenging for many students, but especially ELs. So if we know that we need to have some sort of support for our EL students in order for them to comprehend that vocabulary that they're seeing every day in our classroom. They're going to have a lot of exposure to it, and we want them to not only be exposed to it, but to understand it, to comprehend it, to break it down, and then to use it in our classroom as well. So the following strategies can help make academic vocabulary comprehensible for all students. Embedding these protocols into your daily lesson structure can help students build schema as they consider how to correctly use academic language. So specifically, we're going to look at the academic language that is present in the learning goals of the Wit and Wisdom curriculum. So since our daily lessons, sorry, can you go back one more?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Since our daily lessons are aligned to the module's learning goals, our daily objectives are aligned to those goals as well. And analyzing those goals reveals what academic vocabulary our students will need to comprehend, as well as what they will be expected to apply in practice. From these learning goals, our daily CUB objectives are crafted. So we're going to look at an example. This is from Module 4, so the last module that we did before we left for break. This is ARC 1. So Module 4 was addressing the hostile environments, right? Both Shackleton and Malala were in those hostile environments. This is at the top, the focusing question number 1. So we know that the curriculum is set up, right? ARC 1 is a series of lessons, and at the end of the arc, the students are expected to respond to that focusing question task. That task for ARC 1 for Module 4 is how do Shackleton and his crew respond to the hostile environment of Antarctica. And if you'll click once more, Mr. Peak. So these are all the daily learning goals for those lessons that build towards that focusing question task. And I point out these words because these words are example of that tier 2 academic vocabulary. You'll notice in the pyramid that Mr. Peak showed, there were a lot of verbs, cognitive verbs that existed in that tier 2 structure in his pyramid. That also is true here. So notice, examine, analyze, summarize, determine, find, communicate, identify. These are actions that we're asking our students to be able to do, and ultimately to be able to do them independently. So if we're asking our students to do these things, we need to have, and we also know that they have maybe struggles with learning and using and comprehending the academic language, we're kind of left with, okay, if there's a gap that exists between what my students comprehend independently and what the curriculum is asking them to comprehend independently and apply and practice independently, if there's a gap that exists, we need to think of a support for our students in that gap to get them to a point where they're mastering the academic vocabulary, because like Mr. Peak said, that's going to be the same vocabulary that they see on the STAR test, on the TELPAS. So we can't, shield that from them, right? They're going to have to take those tests and be exposed to that vocabulary. So we need to be careful about, keeping the rigor at a certain level so that they're exposed to that high level academic vocabulary, but also to support them in their comprehension of it. So that's the importance of identifying those cognitive verbs in the learning goals. Those cognitive verbs represent mental tasks that we asked our students to undertake, such as compare, analyze, explain, and we use those verbs to align to our daily CUBs in the lesson learning goals. And we have another session called Diving into Wit and Wisdom, where we go into how to write a CUB, the thought process that I use to write my daily CUBs that's aligned to the launch, the learn, and the land. But it starts with looking at those daily learning goals and seeing what cognitive verbs are there, what our students are going to be expected to do. So when we embed protocols to explicitly teach that what the CUB verbs mean, students better understand the expectations that we have for their classwork. And alternatively, if our students don't understand the objective, they don't understand what they're being asked to do with those cognitive verbs, they're less likely to master it, because they're not understanding, they're not comprehending what it even is we're wanting them to show or wanting them to do in a lesson. So they first have to understand that objective pretty thoroughly to really have a good big picture of what we're going to be doing for the day and how that builds toward their knowledge of eventually answering that essential question in the EOM. So this is an example. This is exactly how the my Cubs look in my classroom on a day-to-day basis. And once your students kind of learn the process for this, it'll become a routine and it'll become something that can happen pretty quickly. So my objective is students will know how to determine why the cruise adventure was called the Trans-Antarctic Expedition. Students will understand how to organize what's happening in chapters 2 and 3 to identify the main ideas of the text. Students will be able to write a summary of chapters 2 and 3 based on the main ideas discussed during the lesson. So you'll notice kind of probably immediately that I've color coded some of these words. And so if you're wondering what that color coding system is, the green words represent those cognitive verbs that are present in the daily learning goals. And when we get to a word, so my students will choral read this with me. I'll read the part that's underlined and then they'll read the rest together. And then we'll stop and I say, okay, well, what does determine mean? And if they can't tell me, they have to reference a class anchor chart that I'll show you in just a second. But it's a way to stop and say, okay, do you know what determine means? Do you know what it means in this context of my classroom? Do you know what it means in conjunction with this curriculum that we're learning together? So all of the verbs are underlined or highlighted in green. And then the purple represents content-specific vocabulary words or language. So main idea is something that's specific to ELA. Summary is something that's specific to ELA. Trans-Antarctic Expedition could be referenced in a geography classroom and a history classroom because, you know, Shackleton's adventure was historical, right? But it's related to the content that we're covering in the class. So I will say that some of these, so if you look at the green and the purple, the green kind of leans towards the idea of those tier 2 words that Mr. Peak showed us. The purple leans toward tier 3 words, right? So that main idea, summary, and Trans-Antarctic Expedition are something that's specific to the content of my classroom. So in breaking down those objective statements, if we hit a word, a cognitive verb, and if my students can't tell me, so the last one we just saw was determine, right? If they can't tell me what they're supposed to do, then they have to reference our classroom academic vocabulary anchor chart. Okay, these are cognitive verbs, but beside them, they have student-friendly definitions that we actually create together in class, because I want it to be something that they're going to remember. It's not necessarily the dictionary definition of when you look up these words, but it's what these words mean in the context of my classroom and what my students are going to be asked to do based upon that cognitive verb. Okay, so the first one, you know, we analyze a lot in the Wooden Wisdom curriculum. It's always coming up, right? And so my students know analyze means to look at something closely and to break it down. To identify means to find something. To support means to give evidence, right? So those high frequency verbs are added to a classroom anchor chart and along with those student friendly definitions, and then they have to tell me, if they can't tell me in the statement what one of those words means, they have to reference that chart to then say, to tell me what that word means in the context of my classroom. And over time, they're able to do that more independently. They're able to not have to reference the anchor chart after a while, after they know, okay, this is what this verb is asking me to do, and this is how I can show that work. And so that helps a lot with understanding those tier 2 academic vocabulary words.
I want to add something. So I did not have this anchor chart, but I think it's so brilliant because specifically the word develop. Like if I would ask a colleague, what do you think the word develop means? We all have so many ideas of what that could be, right? And develop is a word that's used throughout the curriculum. To me, I feel like it's used probably too much, but this definition of to create or change over time, that just makes it more explicit for your students. So they're not having to guess what does develop mean today? You know what I mean? So they can just look at the wall and see the definition that we've all created together. So there's buy-in, there's engagement, and this is just to me, I did not do this last year, but I'm definitely going to do that this year. So this is just brilliant to me.
Specifically develop, I think that's one we came up with together in module 3 when we were talking about Samuel and his like development over the course of the book, that character development that was shown to us. And develop, means to create, but it means to create kind of is a process of creation. It's not just one specific point of creation, but it's over a length of time. And for my students who were language learners, like that's helpful to know because they know specifically when to use that verb. And it's not just to make, it's to, like I said, make over a period of time. And so that kind of helped them remember that Samuel, was changing throughout the entire book. It didn't just happen in one chapter. It was his whole experience, his whole process. That also aligns like with all of our protagonists pretty much that we see that transformation, that character development that goes through those novels. And so that was important to kind of point out in that way. So yeah, it's something that those definitions we kind of create together in class, and they're more likely to remember it that way as well. So y'all are going to help me on our next slide. We are going to look at a cub, and you're going to tell me which words you would highlight. So first, we're going to do words in green, those cognitive verbs, those words that show action, that tell our students what they're going to be doing for today, like the words that I just showed you on the anchor chart. So drop in the chat for me any words that you see in this objective that you would highlight in green.
Almost right out of the gate. Analyze.
Analyze. There's at least one in every statement. Identify. Yes, develop. Awesome. Mr. Peak, would you click once? Perfect. So yes, y'all are exactly right. Analyze, develop, identify, discuss. Also uses, they kind of know that one when they walk into my class. So that wasn't on the chart, I don't believe, but definitely those other ones were. Those are pretty common cognitive verbs that we see in Wit and Wisdom. So yeah, perfect. So now this might be a little bit trickier, but think about the words in these objective statements that you as a teacher, knowing what you know after teaching this curriculum a year, if you've taught module 4, which words would be very important for our students to know to understand that content of module 4, or content specific words. Hostile, for sure, right? Because we talked, that's in our essential question for module 4. So it's really important that they know that word. Depiction, yes. Anything else? Hostile setting. Transient guard expedition. Awesome. Mr. Peak, will you hit it once for me? Perfect. So I have a lot highlighted. So depiction, Antarctica, setting, author, text, photographs, and then hostile environment. I wanted that whole phrase of hostile environment. Now, and that's going to be like specific to our module 4 content. Like I said, that's in that essential question. So that phrase, I want them to know that hostile environment means dangerous place. Like that's something, those kind of key phrases that have so much frequency in our classroom, like the hostile environment, transformation for bud, not buddy, like the module that we're about to start teaching, right? That there's that personal transformation in that phrase in the essential question. So those big ideas, those phrases that get repeated just a lot in the classroom, they should be able to kind of recall immediately. So that's why hostile environment is highlighted in purple. Setting definitely is content specific to ELA. Author. Antarctica could be content specific to geography, but it is content specific for us because module 4 that's what it was all about. That was the setting of our first book of module 4. So great job. So that is a way that I kind of color code my CUP objectives. It doesn't take very long to do in planning. And truly when your students, after they get into the habit of breaking down that vocabulary and referencing the anchor chart, it does become quicker. And then when it becomes a routine in your classroom, it's something that you can implement that honestly doesn't take up that much time, because we know with the Win Wisdom curriculum, like we're so stretched for time, and it's such a kind of heavy curriculum. We try to find ways where we can support our ELs that's not going to take away a ton of time from us. So that's something that's quick that y'all can do that I wanted to share with y'all today. So hopefully you think you can apply it to your own classroom as well.
I wanted to add something. So something that you can also consider is that, so if you were like diehard Teachers College, you know that we taught largely skills, right? So setting, main ideas, those kinds of words we're all familiar with. But now that we're moving into Wit and Wisdom, it's very content driven. So Trans-Antarctic Expedition, Antarctica, those things that may fall outside of the skills in an ELA classroom, we still want to draw attention to those because those are content specific words, right? And you'll notice that some of these you may have chosen other ones. It's up to you on what the most important words you want your students to really dive into. Also, something I love about this way of annotating your objective for the students is they're also noticing sentence structures and the parts of speech that words have. So all of the green ones are verbs, right? And so knowing where they lie in the sentence and how they're going to do something with all the things that are in purple is very important in their own writing. So this can be, I mean, this kind of is like very layered in the possibilities of this. So just something to consider when you're implementing this in your classroom.
Yeah, it made me think of something. But when I do this in my classroom, we'll read the statement together. I'll say the words in green are, and then my students say verbs, and then I say verbs show, or I say what do verbs do, and they say show action. So that's just like something that I say at the beginning, and it gets kind of repetitive, but it's something that kind of reinforces those word parts, because we don't really have a chance to really explicitly teach grammar, and our EL students really need it. So that's a way to kind of do it quickly and like break down those word parts and that sentence structure to reinforce it too.
Okay, so I'm gonna move on to word walls, and in particular, how to interact with word walls. So I'm gonna give you a strategy that I think is really fun and cool, and well, I'll introduce it to you and I'll tell you maybe the kinds of ways that you can use it. So the best word walls are interactive. So when designing your word wall, you want to try to avoid adhering or putting the words up with glue, tape, or staples unless they're laminated. So ideally, students and teachers want to be able to remove and reattach the words to the word wall. You want students to have ownership and use the word wall regularly, because they have created these resources themselves and they should be encouraged to use them. So if they're just up on the wall, then they become kind of background to everything that's happening and it becomes numb. So if there's any way that you can make it interactive, if they're laminated, you can staple them and then just pull them off and then staple them back up. But students should be able to just come take them off to their desk, to their group, to just have as a reference, so that it's more manipulative. And one strategy that I really love is called What's the Relationship? So these are 9 words from Module 1 in Wit and Wisdom. And they're all pretty hard words, especially for beginner intermediate students. But after we have gone through them with the lessons, what I like to do is at the beginning of class, like when they're walking in, like a bell ringer or in the welcome, I may put 2 words up on the wall and say, what's the relationship between these 2 words? Okay. Another way that you can do it is you can have manipulative. So you can take the words off the word wall and then just have the students put arrows to connect these ideas. And the idea is that they're sharing their connections between the words. When we can connect words to one another, they are deeper embedded into our long-term memory, right? So we're actually internalizing them. And so what I'd like for us to do is kind of try that. in an activity that we're going to do. So you're basically you're going to choose two words and then you're going to explain the relationship. Um, this can happen very quickly and you can choose the amount of words you want the students to do. You can actually choose the words that you want them to be considering, right? Because these may have to do with themes or concepts that you want to really solidify with the students, or you want to just check for understanding if they know what these words mean. So let's take a look at an activity. Ms. Stefik just put the link in the chat, and we're all going to work. There's 5 of us, so we may have to work on slides 2 and 3. But so this is what I would do, like a digital version. So I may have this on my Promethean board, or you could even just put the words like on the whiteboard in the front of the classroom and write it on the whiteboard. But basically, I tell my students, below you will find vocabulary words that we have learned. You're going to choose 2 words and explain their relationship on your groups slide. So I may have them do groups if they need that support, that scaffold. And after you have chosen your words, you're going to click on the button for your group number to move to the slide to enter your words. Okay. So this would be the slide where we are going to enter our information. So I'm going to back out because this is what you will see. At the top, if you scroll up, you will see the 6 words, so you don't have to go in between slides. And all you're going to do is come down here to word 1, and you're just going to choose 2 words. And it could be any of them. If you today are not familiar with any of these, choose some that you are familiar with. And then your relationship does not have to be, it's what you think, right? There's no wrong or right. This is a great way for teachers to check to see if they are really understanding these words, if they're understanding the concepts that lie behind these words. So let's give it a try. So we have 9 words and there are 5 of us in here. So 4 of us can do the red slide and maybe 1 on the orange slide.
We have a volunteer to go down to the orange. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mino. So you'll do the orange, everyone else will be on that, or that slide number 2, that red slide.
Wow, awesome. So some of us are anonymous in here, so please forgive me if I don't know the author. So who wrote on this third line, hardships and cope? I want to give credit to the author. Okay, Mr. McGee. Okay, so he said, many people go through hard times and hardships in parentheses and learn how to cope. Many people that go through hard times learn how to cope with the stresses of life. That's really great. Something that I would notice about a student is that they chose hard times, which is like a phrase that's a synonym for this vocabulary word. So they really understand the meaning of the word. I might encourage them to use the word, and he did. He kind of showed me, I do know that word, I know how to use it, but I am writing it the way I want to write it. Right here, the second line, I'm not sure who the author is. Many people during the Great Depression had to endure hardships. This includes loss of jobs and starvation. Okay, so these are examples of hardships. So I know this student really understands what hardships are, and that during the Great Depression, there were hardships. So they understand that relationship. You'll notice that these words, or these phrases, these sentences, they may use these in a focusing question task. This will help them kind of form their ideas, because these focusing question tasks, if they're essays, they may ask them to express ideas, and they're going to use specific vocabulary when they do this. So this is a great way to check in and see, okay, maybe we need to kind of talk about hardships more. We need to focus on what that looks like. Are our characters going through that? How do we know? What evidence do we find in Bud Not Buddy or Out of the Dust? So this is a great, y'all did awesome. When someone goes through a difficult time, it's important that they show resilience. Resilience means to not give up. Oh, that's awesome. So I would tell this student, while you're giving your reader the definition of this word, so maybe they don't know it, but you've just shared your knowledge with them. So this is a great way to just check in with your students, and there's no wrong or right answer. You may have students who talk about, when they're talking about hardships, they talk about boats and journey. You know, they may be way off with what they think those words are, but that just lets you know that maybe I need to group these students together with other students who have a stronger sense of the vocabulary so they can support each other. But this is just a great activity if you'd like to try it. Like I said, I've chosen 2 words, like survivor and hardships, and I'll have them write it out for me at the start of class while I'm taking attendance, and then I'll just pick up like a post-it note and just check it later on. Oops. Okay, and now we're going to move into vocabulary journals. We're all familiar with the 3 journals that Wit and Wisdom asks us to have. So last year I was all virtual. I had one block that came kind of in the middle of the year that came back. But most of my students were virtual. So they had to use a virtual notebook. And I had the response journal, the vocabulary, and the knowledge all together. And I had to kind of front load the technology like we all had to, which is teaching them how to do all these new things that have nothing to do with ELA, but just technology in general. But I would have a Frayer model for my students. And sometimes, if, you know, this is time consuming a lot of the times. And sometimes we felt like, or I felt like I really have to get through this lesson. It's the first year. I want to focus on pacing and fidelity. So sometimes I would fill out the definition for them, and I would have them come up with examples and non-examples or characteristics. So you can scaffold, depending on your student's level, what they're able to do successfully, because you want them to feel successful. So this is just an example of my notebook. This is what I would give the students so that they would know what to do. And something that I loved about the digital version is, like, it may take them time to draw, and they may be consumed with the drawing and the artwork. But if they just look up a picture and paste it, they can that can be a graphic representation so that you can see that they understand the word, but they may not have the vocabulary to fully explain it yet. And it could be fun for them too. So, and if in classroom environment, another session that we're doing, I kind of go over pictures. There's like a little activity where you can do, it's kind of fun for the students, and you get to vote on a picture that we all think would represent a word. So this is, I just wanted to quickly go over the digital vocabulary journals that I had. Oh, Miss Stefik, you're muted.
You have a question in the chat. Mr. Rodriguez asked, would you do this during the do now portion? Mr. Rodriguez, did you mean the vocabulary journal or the strategy?
No, what we just did, the connection vocabulary, would you do that during the do now, Mr.
The
P?
relationships. When do you do that?
Yes, I would do it maybe for homework as well. I would do it at the start of class, just something to get them excited. And then I would point out a few, like if I did it physical where I had Post-its, I would read a few of them that I thought were really good to get them excited. And just like sometimes as teachers, our students will say the most profound things and they don't realize it's really profound. And so just celebrating that we're all just sharing knowledge. I'm sharing knowledge as a teacher, what I know, and you're sharing what you've learned and what you know with each other and with me. So yeah, I would do this maybe during a warm up. I mean, during my taking attendance and just kind of getting things situated at the start of the class. Yeah.
And for the template, are you able to share that template with us?
Yes, I can share that with you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Peak, like he said, he did digital journals. He was on virtual teaching all year. I was back face to face pretty soon, so I did physical journals in paper and paper copies. Next year, just to help with organization, my students are going to be responsible for maintaining a knowledge binder in my classroom instead of a journal, but it'll have the same sections. So the daily notes section kind of combines that response and that knowledge journal that Win Wisdom wants us to have. So they'll have their, we do like a procedure where they'll do their heading, write down the framing question for the day, any notes that we have from the lesson, or if like say we do a notice and wonder, that goes on that page. And then their land, their CFU and the land is often written on that page as well. And they'll come bring it up to me and I'll check it. So the sections though in the binder will be the daily note section, a vocabulary section, assessments and data, and then learning goals. There's going to be a big push from I think across the district, I know for my administration and for Mr. Peaks, for our students to track their own data, track their own goals, to kind of give them some agency and autonomy over kind of tracking their progress in our classes. And so you might want to consider having a binder in your classroom too, because it would be a good place to kind of keep that data for them as well. In the following slide, though, I'm going to show you how I embed a vocabulary protocol into the launch section of my daily Wit and Wisdom lessons. And I use this procedure to address my vocabulary deep dives as well. So in a normal Wit and Wisdom lesson, I cover everything that exists, but stuff gets shuffled around sometimes. So vocabulary pretty much always lives in the launch because I want them to have that prior knowledge, that the knowledge of that vocabulary word kind of before they encounter it in the lesson. And so, and even for deep dives as well, like I won't do it at the end because after we hit that land, my students are done for the day. So I take that deep dive, whether it being like an extra thing on the end, I try to embed it somewhere. It also usually saves a little bit of time because I'm kind of just embedding it in, taking the like main ideas from the deep dive and putting it into the launch usually. So I'm going to show you what that protocol looks like in my launch on the next slide. So for example, the word would be perseverance. We have the part of speech. We have the meaning that the curriculum gives us: continued unstopping behavior despite challenges. I have a visual representation, a picture that's super important to give them a picture to kind of see what that means. And then you also see that you can see the word in context in Blood on the River, where that word shows up in context. So when they come across that in the text, they kind of have some prior knowledge then of what that word means, and they're able to identify it easier. So that kind of helps them build that knowledge of vocabulary. So how this would work in my classroom, Mr. Peak, if you go to the next slide. The students would copy the word and definition into the vocabulary section of their knowledge binder. They'll repeat after me the word 3 times. They'll repeat the definition once. I would give then a student-friendly definition for the word perseverance. It was the definition that they wrote down was continued unstopping behavior despite challenges. However, I would say perseverance means to not give up or something of the effect, just something quick and simple that they can kind of latch onto. I explain how the picture represents the word, and then I read the line from the text that includes the vocabulary word. I will say that the biggest, in my planning, kind of on that slide, the biggest time, the part that takes the most amount of time is that in context, that word in context. And so, if every day you can't show that, that's okay, but try, it really does give them, seeing the word in context in a sentence is really beneficial for students in that connected text, because it shows them how it's used in a word. So it does require a little bit of, we have to search, okay, on what page is this word actually from? But the benefit of it is really great. And so the vocabulary protocol, it's, several steps, but if your students are used to it and it's a routine in your classroom, it can happen pretty quickly. And then, you're really going deep into what that word means as well. And so that would be like a vocabulary protocol that I would use just day to day in order for them to kind of keep track of that vocabulary journal, and it'd be something that they're utilizing most days in my classroom and going back and referencing. And then, like I said, the picture is definitely like a non-negotiable. They need that visual support. It really, really supports them. So I would encourage y'all to see if that's something that you feel like you could fit into your structure, because it does pay off if you have that routine kind of set up.
And I do want to emphasize, as much as you were saying, Ms. Stefik, that context is so important, because students often say, why do I need to know this? When am I going to use this? And so if they come across the word, the Great Depression, and they're reading a book that takes place in the Great Depression, and they're seeing that word over and over and over and over again, this is crucial. Like, every word that we learn is important. You're going to encounter it again. And this is what it's going to look like. And also the part of speech, knowing how that fits into the context is important. The word hostile, if you speak Spanish, that word hostile, the translation would come after the noun, right? So this word comes before. So just students being aware of how these vocabulary words that they're learning fit into the context is like crucial.
And it's another way to kind of just embed or reinforce those grammar concepts that we don't have time to like explicitly teach, but putting a word part up on our vocabulary, definition, that gives you a quick opportunity to say, okay, well, now what's a noun? And, after a while, if they don't have that background knowledge, you'll start to be able to like build it in them as well. So sometimes teachers say this is a lot of steps, but I promise it goes pretty quickly once you like have a routine for it. And it's a way to expose them to that higher level vocabulary that they really need to know to break down this text, because we know our texts are very dense, are very academic vocabulary heavy. And so this is just like a protocol that you can embed into your lesson that will address that need for your students. Okay, so we are nearing the end. Those are the strategies that we're going to be I've shown y'all today. And so we want to hear from you. So we invite you to come off of mute and share what was successful or not successful about the journals in your classroom last year. So talk to us maybe about your experience utilizing the journals last year. Was it something that maybe was a struggle, or was it something that you felt like you could kind of use consistently? And then alternatively, what adjustments are you going to be making this year for the digital or for the journals in your classroom for this school year? Will they be physical or digital, or how will they be utilized? Just want you all to reflect on your past practice of journal use, and then your future practice, what you might be doing differently this school year.
Okay, I'll start. Well, last year I taught 8th grade with Wit and Wisdom. So they're moving me to 6th grade. But I found the digital journals to be kind of difficult. I wasn't quite as, the kids just couldn't get it. It wasn't flowing like I wanted it to flow. And so then when we came back then I just would type up the words that I wanted them to focus on, and I would put them in Schoology for them. And so that way that, they didn't have to worry about writing it down. I would, basically do what you did. I just didn't put the sentence from the text. So I will do that this time, put the sentence from the text because I can see how they can, see what that's part of. But I would just type it up in Schoology, type the words up with the meaning. I would do kid-friendly meanings and send it to them through Schoology. But when we came back face-to-face, I did require a journal. I do like vocabulary journals because that's a way that they can go back and reference a word if they forget what the word means. They've seen the word before, so they can go back and look at it. So this year, I'm assuming that we'll all be face-to-face, but, I will incorporate the journals. And then that is a good idea. Like you said, you can take every bit of 5 minutes to go over those words real quickly before you get ready to start in the learn part of your lesson. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share. I definitely love this session. I do teach 5th grade, so it is much different than what y'all are teaching, but I think the vocabulary in any grade is what it is. Right. Last year, journals were a struggle, I think more so because of just, they had no knowledge of how to be able to use technology in order to develop. And those who did, man, they thrived, but it was a struggle. So I am kind of torn. I want them to have the option, those who do know how to use digital, to be able to use that. But those who prefer to have a physical, something tangible, to be able to use that too. I love the Knowledge Finder. I kind of do something somewhat similar to that right now. So I think just emphasizing that, and then also the introduction of the vocabulary at the very beginning with the picture, the chants. I do chants, but I like the structure of yours, so I'm going to take that away. I love it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Nice.
Oh.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, last year consistency was a challenge. Like our students, we were adapting, the students had to adapt. So I'm sure a lot of us felt like what we started out with was not what we ended up with. And so this year, I think we're excited about starting with something that we're going to follow through the entire year. So I understand what you're saying, Ms. Trevino. So thank you. Mr. McGee, I'm sorry.
No problem. So this is going to be my first year with you guys. I want to say kudos to you, Ms. Stefik, and you, Mr. Peak. Y'all did a wonderful job. It was short and sweet and to the point. I like that. I often say, I'm going to leave this alone, but I often say adults are a lot like children. We have attention issues as well. So this was very great. It was very good. Last year, the district that I worked with, journals, and I'm pretty sure it was across the board, they were hard. During that time, I was a special ed teacher, so I co-taught. So we tried different ways to engage the children with the virtual notebooks, as well as the hard notebooks or the physical notebooks. Like everyone else, I found that the digital notebooks, they became very cumbersome, no matter how much work we put in actually kind of hand feeding the students the notebooks. It became just cumbersome for us to continue to do it. So I think with what you guys showed with diligence, I think that it will be a great thing. I'm looking forward to learning more about wit and wisdom, and I also wrote down what is a cub. So I want, which is, I'm going to learn how to utilize all of that. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
So I guess I'll talk real quick about my experience with digital notebooks. So it may sound rosy, like it was super successful for me, but I had challenges because our students, first of all, who are virtual in middle school, they did not learn responsibility, accountability, and like self-management. They did not learn that. We just threw them out there. So that was something that I had to constantly go back to and teach them, okay, guys, and I would create a schedule for my students that they had to manage themselves, like with all their classes. And I also had to create videos on how to copy and paste this page to your notebook. I had to do a lot of that. So my students, I think, were more successful, but because I had to do a lot more work to kind of support them in that way. But I do think that, you know, I'm going to try more physical this year just because the act of writing can sometimes help students internalize and also graphically write the letters and how they look. When you're typing, to me, there's sometimes a disconnect, especially if you have trouble typing for students. But I also did, if you're interested, you can email me, but there is a way that with Google Docs and Google Slides, you can do speech to text. So if you're wanting to do more digital stuff, but it takes too much time for them to type, they can have headphones and just speak what they want to say, which will help with our speaking domain, and it will write out what they're going to say on any kind of document. I do encourage you to find places throughout the year to infuse digital versions of something that you do, because it's an important skill that our district is not moving away from. We're not going back to copies and everything. It's COVID kind of pushed us faster into the direction that we're going. And it made technology more equitable across our country. So we want to encourage them to use it and give them choice, like Ms. Trevino was saying. Some students thrive with it and some don't. So just knowing what works for your students and telling your students, look, whatever works for you, you're going to do this the rest of the year. We're not going to switch back and forth, right? Because we need consistency. So, and welcome to Aldine, Mr. McGee.
Yes, welcome. Welcome to Grantham, right? You'll be at Grantham? Awesome. I'm there. I'm moving to up to 8th grade, but I will be there. So you'll see me around. You have a question in the chat, Mr. Peak. Did you create your own digital notebook?
We were given one from the district, but as you can see, I made some alterations. So, and I would release the notebook per module. So I would take away their module 1 so that they, you know what I mean? Because the slides would become so much that they would have to scroll. So it was like a fresh start. It was an opportunity for me to see what worked and what didn't. And so module 2, I came out with a new version. I let them keep their old module 1 if they wanted to access it, especially at the end of the year when we're looking back for heroes, hostile environments, that kind of thing. They kept them, but I would release a new version every module. And it's really just about, just like the first day of school, it's about procedures, classroom management, the same thing with digital. Everything that you're expecting them to do, you have to teach it explicitly. But yeah, this last year, there were long nights, I'm not gonna lie.
Yes, for sure. Awesome. So we'll move into if we have any other questions, but before we get there, I'm going to in the chat drop the link to the attendance form. That is very important to fill out, is your credit for attending today. It's also going to enter you in a drawing for a seed goodie bag, and they will let you know if we'll do attendance tonight by 5, and they will let you know by tonight if you won the drawing for today. It's a very cool bag. So
yes,
y'all fill out that attendance form, and then you'll get an email about the survey for this session, and you'll have 7 days to fill it out to get your certificate. So please remember to fill that out. Let us know how we did. And thank y'all so much for being here. We'll open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions. Oh, let me also drop. We didn't mention about Schoology yet. Mr. Peak, do you want to?
Yeah, so there is a Schoology group. It's not a course, it's a Schoology group for the SEED conference. And so all of the presentations or sessions that you go to, we're gonna house our our presentations and all of our resources for you inside of that group. So if there's something that you saw today, or there's something that you see in another session that you're like, that went by really fast, but I wish I could see that more, or really kind of dive into that, it'll be available in this Schoology group. So if there's a code in the chat that Ms. Stefik just put in there. If you go to Schoology, and Mr. McGee, are you familiar with Schoology? Do you have your Aldine email set up and everything yet?
I just received it. So I have to go in and kind of look through everything. That's what I was trying to do as I was doing it, as y'all were talking. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. So you'll probably get more training on Schoology, but keep this code. We'll also send an email out later this week, just as a reminder of the code. And once you join it, you're in there. There will be videos of the presentations. I'm trying to think of what else. It'll be everything that you need from this so that it can help you and support you as you start this new year with new ideas, you know.
Mr. Peak, you said that code is for what? I'm sorry.
A Schoology group. So we have courses, like our students were in courses, but then there are Schoology groups. So when you're in Schoology, the top bar, it says groups. You click my groups, join group, and then you enter that 12-digit or 13-digit code.
Okay, thank you. The template for the earlier, making connection to the.
Yeah, the word relationships, I will put that in the Schoology group.
Perfect, thank you so much.
It might not be there today, but like I said, the presentations will be there, so you can email Ms. Stefik or I anytime. And if there's something that you liked and that you would like, we can email it to you or point you to the direction where you can find it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank y'all both so much. This is awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. We're so glad that y'all found this helpful. Any other questions, just one more time before we good? All righty. Well, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. I was here yesterday for the look through for module 0 and 1, but I haven't received the survey from yesterday.
Okay, so we can double check about that. That's not something that happens on our end. PowerSchool generates those survey emails. So hopefully you should get it soon. But we will, will you send me an email, Ms. Faust? And would you, and I can connect you with our
I think it's Ms. Wright.
Yeah, no, it wasn't me, but normally it takes about 24 hours for those surveys to come up. She just has to keep checking.
Okay.
But normally they come up.
Thank you, Ms. Faust.
Yeah, thank you. It should push through. Yeah, that's on the PowerSchool end. So hopefully you'll get it soon. If you don't, feel free to email me and we can see what we can do. We can ask our program director if she has anything to add for that. Any other questions before we close out? Awesome. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. This was so fun to get in to talk to y'all and hear from you and your perspectives. We'll be here for a couple more minutes if anyone has any other questions, but if you don't, you are free to leave and enjoy the rest of your day and your other C-Conference sessions if you're going to them. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Ooh, and if you, after the Google form, if you're one of the winners that are chosen, they'll email you today by 5 o'clock. So you want to look at your email. The tote bag, you know, as teachers, tote bags are amazing. So it's a really good quality. And the seed logo is like a heart tree. Anyway, it's very cool. Sorry, I'm excited about it. Okay, y'all have a great day. And thank you so much for waking up early with us.
I have a question. This is just for you two. So I'm trying to go in and complete the. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I'm gonna stop the recording, but then we'll
okay.
whatever.